Thanks to the National Lottery Heritage Fund and National Lottery players, Hope Mill Theatre have spent the last year researching the history and heritage of Hope Mill and the surrounding areas. As part of this research, we've looked into some of the stories from Holt Town and Ancoats and the area that Hope Mill Theatre calls home. This is New Islington Marina. As you can see, Ancoats and Holt Town is currently undergoing a huge regeneration and is rapidly becoming one of the most desirable areas in Manchester. But it hasn't always been like this. It looks a bit different now, but you can still see the mill buildings in the background, which characterise this part of Manchester. According to the census of 1841, Ancoats was the most densely populated area of Manchester, with an average of 20 people living in each house. 55% of the houses in Ancoats had no plumbing and 56% of the streets were never cleaned. Unlike London or Liverpool, which have big rivers to act as sewers, Manchester slums used a privy, a seat over a pit, shared by up to 30 families which needed to be emptied. These privies overflowed when there was heavy rain. These conditions led to outbreaks of cholera and typhus. Mick Burke, born in Ancoats in 1898, describes a typical day.
Our Nellie was a doffer at McConnell's cotton mill. I used to go with her for dinner every Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday. The first time I was on my way to school, I was teeming in sweat and was frightened to death of walking in between the looms. There was only a very narrow space and it was so noisy you couldn't hear them talk. The women were in their bare feet because of the heat and the floors were full of oil. Each one had a big oily patch pinned to her skirt for kneeling down on, and these patches were dripping. All the mills there were supplied by canal, and the boats used to tie up near McConnell's where there was a break in the wall with a wooden shutter over it for protection. The boats were bringing coal in all day long, and 2 planks would be run from the boat to the entrance of the mill fire hole, which was about 5 yards away. Men would fill their wheelbarrows with a slack and run along the plank, tip it and back again. They took it as casual work and would get so much an hour. Life was hard, but there was always something to soothe you, and people were more together. If anybody was in trouble, that sit in the house and talk, they went to town properly when they celebrated. Christmas was always good.
These conditions led to the rise of gangs, known as scuttlers, who operated across the inner city areas of Manchester and Salford. Various areas were associated with different gangs and each gang was possessors of their territory. Ancoats had 6 different gangs. Prussia Street, Allen Street and Bradford Street. Also, Holland Street, the Bengal Tigers, because of their association with Bengal Street, which is about half a mile away from Hope Mill Theatre, and, of course, the Pollard Street Gang. Pollard Street scuttlers covered the area between the Ashton Canal and the River Medlock. And, according to some reports, the Ancoats gangs were widely feared.
The streets were full of life then, and there was always somewhere to go or something to watch. Not least people coming out the pubs blind drunk at all hours of the day and night. I knew 1 or 2 of the scuttlers or Napoo gangs they were around the beginning of the First World War. They used to wear red 2 silk ties, knotted with the ends flowing, and the buckled belts. And one gang would fight another, but they didn't use weapons. Well, except their belts when they got into trouble. In any case, the coppers soon shifted them.
In order to counter the negative effects of these gangs, not just in Ancoats but throughout the UK, a series of lads' clubs was established. Now, if you're from Manchester or a fan of music from the 1980s, you'll probably recognise this as the most famous example of a lads' club. However, there was also an Ancoats lads' club. And this is where it was. Ancoats Lads Club was based for most of its life in Beswick Mill, which adjoins Hope Mill on the corner of Beswick Street and Spectator Street. A lot of our information about Ancoats Lads Club comes from a book published in 1951 and written by its then chairman. The book focuses on the role of Arthur Taylor, who established the club. Whilst his achievement is important and should be celebrated, his role has already been recorded, so we'd like to focus on the voice of Ralph Banks, born on the 16th of February 1887 in Ancoats.
There were very few rival attractions to keep lads off the streets, so nothing could compete with the fascinations of ping pong, the ring board, draughts and chess. Well, darts were only just coming into fashion. And all this for a penny a week. Then there were those weekends at Marple Cottage and the leadership of Mr. Walker and Mr. Patterson. Oh, we were in our element, just messing about with the old motorboat, obeying the orders of Admiral Jack Smith and swinging around the starting handle by the hour. Or, if you were not mechanically minded, there was a decrepit rowing boat. Well, the long walks over the Derbyshire hills were delightfully strenuous and gave us contented rest as we sought our straw palisades mattress on the cottage floor.
So, life was tough in Ancoats in years gone by, but people still needed entertainment. And during the course of our research, we've discovered that we're not the only theatre to have existed on Pollard Street. This site was once the location of Star Hall. In the 1870s and 80s, the building on this site was called Star Music Hall, and it hosted a wide range of variety acts. You can see them listed in newspaper entries from the time. The music hall also hosted regular boxing bouts in the 1880s. This advert is from March 1888, and Yankee Henry Carney is listed as the proprietor at the time. Star Music Hall appears to have had a number of different proprietors during its history, some of whom were also variety performers. One of the managers was James Joseph Bleakley. His history is a bit sketchy, but he appears to have been at one time a brewer as well as the hall manager. There's also evidence that he was involved with the well-known troupe of performers known as Toots Minstrels. In 1889, Francis Crossley bought the Star Music Hall. His daughter Ella can tell us more about it.
My father, Francis Crossley, known to his friends and family as Frank, was born in Ireland in 1839. He was a very successful engineer and lived for a time in Bowden, Cheshire, a very leafy and well-to-do part of the world. However, he and my mother were utterly dedicated to their faith and philanthropic works, so came to a decision to live with, work with and help the people of one of the most deprived neighbourhoods in Manchester, Ancoats. And that's what's brought us here. My father bought Star Hall in 1889 for £20,000. At the time, it was a disreputable building with pictures of prize fighters on the walls. He demolished it, rebuilding in its place a meeting hall, bathrooms, coffee rooms and housing for the workers. It became known as the Crossley Holiness Mission. Much can be said about my father, so much, in fact, that in 1926 I wrote a short book about him. It was entitled He Heard from God, the story of Frank Crossley. After my father's death in 1897, I took over the running of the hall. My name is Helen Crossley, known as Ella. By 1911, I was managing the running of the hall with the help of Isabella Volkman and my particular friend, Mary Alice Hatch. Mary was a qualified midwife in Ancoats, but in 1921, after many years of hard toil running the mission, we moved to live together in Sussex. We handed the running of the hall to the Salvation Army, who, I'm pleased to say, were dedicated to providing help for unmarried, and thus continued our good works today.
Thank you for taking the time to watch and find out more about the history of Hope Mill, Holt Town and Ancoats. Please have a look at our website for more information.